The United States and China have called last week's historic summit in Beijing highly successful. Presidents Trump and Xi Jinping committed to building a constructive relationship, stressing the importance of strategic stability in ties.
There were no major breakthroughs announced, but the friction-free summit appears to have brought the two superpowers closer. 2 days of meetings filled with pomp and pageantry ended with smiles and handshakes. President Trump touted what he called fantastic trade deals with China, while President Xi hailed a new positioning between the world's two biggest economies. Few details were revealed about the deals that were reached.
The White House confirmed their leaders agreed to establish a U.S.-China Board of Trade and a Board of Investment to help manage their trade differences going forward. Mr. Trump and Mr. Xi also reached a consensus that the Strait of Hormuz should be reopened immediately. The Chinese leader added the war in Iran should not have started in the first place.
On Taiwan, Mr. Trump cautioned the island against declaring independence, while President Xi made clear that the issue was the most important one in U.S.-China relations. He cautioned that mishandling the Taiwan issue could lead to conflict.
Well, for the key takeaways from the summit and where it all leaves U.S.-China ties and the geopolitical space they occupy, and also where we are right now, a couple of days after the summit, let's speak with Bonnie Glaser. She's Managing Director of the Indo-Pacific Program at the German Marshall Fund. She joins us this morning from Reston, Virginia. Bonnie, good to have you on the show. Appreciate it very much. So we know that the summit produced some verbal alignment on the Iran war, but given the latest from President Trump that the clock is ticking, I'm wondering if, the U.S. should resume attacks on Iran. What's the reaction going to be from Beijing like, given, what they agreed to in the summit itself, and also, what they agreed to in terms of where they are going to try and move forward on the conflict?
Well, it seems that there is some alignment between the United States and China. Neither country wants Iran to have a nuclear weapon. Both countries want the Strait of Hormuz to be open. They oppose Tehran charging tolls for using the waterway. But China has made clear, even during the summit, when their foreign ministry spokesman did a press conference, that Beijing opposes the use of force and does not want to see the resumption of hostilities in the Strait. So I think that if the United States does resume bombing, that China will probably express concerns. It will not necessarily come to Tehran's aid. Of course, President Trump has said that he received pledges from Xi Jinping that China will not supply any weapons to Iran. And that's something that I think the U.S. has been quite concerned about, not only weapons, but also the provision of satellite imagery for targeting purposes that has enabled Tehran to target U.S. bases in the region.
Bonnie, I'm glad you brought up tolls, because we are hearing that Tehran says it's going to charge tech companies, which use undersea cables in the Strait and the Persian Gulf, a toll. So I'm wondering how serious would it be if internet cables running through the Strait and, the area are disrupted or damaged? Is it going to be as serious as the choking off of oil and gas supplies? And keeping in mind, of course, that a number of U.S. companies are dependent, on those cables.
Right. Well, that would certainly make an already bad situation worse. There are so many countries, especially in Asia, that are really hurting, not only from the restriction of container ships and tankers through the Strait, but also not receiving shipments of fertilizer. It's not only oil and gas. And so if on top of that, these undersea cables are cut, that would be quite serious, because undersea cables aren't repaired overnight. And I don't know how much of a backup system exists, but it could be very consequential.
And Bonnie, the summit produced language about constructive strategic stability. As we know, tensions do remain across trade, chips, Taiwan, the Iran war as well. What were the two sides actually committing to, and what are they leaving unresolved?
Well, on constructive strategic stability, which was introduced by Xi Jinping on day one of the summit, and in the United States fact sheet that was actually just released today in Washington, D.C., the U.S. announced that they've essentially accepted that framework for the bilateral relationship. And it may sound like it's a positive thing, but I'm honestly not convinced. Xi Jinping, since he came to power, has been trying to impose a framework on Washington. We saw him talk about during the Obama administration, for example, a new model of great power relations. And that was something that the U.S. considered, but actually did not accept in the end. And now Xi Jinping is coming out with yet another offer, constructive strategic stability. And I think what that means in practice is they see it as representing a consensus between the United States and China to have a truce, to not pursue any actions that would harm the other's interest. And that means if the United States decides to go forward with an arms sale to Taiwan or impose more technology restrictions on China, I expect that Beijing will cry foul. They will say that it is a violation of this Beijing consensus. So I really see it as an effort to lock the United States in to ensure that it does not challenge what China sees as its core interests.
See, on Taiwan, there's so many, different points of view. President Trump describing the Taiwan arms sales as a possible bargaining chip with China. William Lai, the Taiwanese president, saying they're essential deterrents. President Xi has a different point of view, calling Taiwan the core issue. Is Taiwan then the first real test of this U.S.-China reset?
Well, I guess Taiwan, of course, is always the most sensitive issue in the U.S.-China relationship, and the one matter that could trigger a major crisis. And I think that so far, President Trump has handled this issue quite well. In prior phone calls he had with Xi Jinping, he simply said that he understood Chinese concerns about Taiwan, and that he accepted the fact that China attaches importance to Taiwan. But these were essentially non-committal statements. Now it sounds like he spent quite a bit of time listening to Xi Jinping deliver China's version of history, that Taiwan was part of China for thousands of years, and that Taiwan is the provocateur and seeking independence. And he even said that it wants independence because Taiwan wants a war. Well, I can't think of anything that I would disagree with more. I don't think Taiwan wants a war in the Taiwan Strait. It simply wants to preserve its autonomy. And it sounds like there wasn't much discussion about Chinese coercion against Taiwan, the military pressure, the cyber intrusions, all of the actions that they take against Taiwan to lower the morale of people in Taiwan and try to get them essentially to capitulate and become part of China.
Bonnie, modest progress has been described as that in trade and tariffs, but we also know the U.S. and China remain worlds apart on structural economic issues. We're talking about industrial subsidies, state ownership, overcapacity. In the short term, I can see how you can talk about the two separately, but I'm wondering in the middle to longer term, how are the two sides going to reconcile this fundamental difference?
Well, the United States for now has concluded that it made an effort to change China, convince the Chinese to implement economic reforms, and then it failed. And now we just have to protect our own interests. I do think that's a mistake. I think we should try to continue to talk to China about the overcapacity problem, Chinese subsidies, industrial strategies. But for the time being, that's off the table, and the new Board of Trade is not intended to solve those kinds of trade frictions. In fact, the Board of Trade is intended to try and grow trade in non-sensitive areas, particularly, of course, U.S. exports to China, because President Trump wants to narrow the bilateral trade deficit. So I agree with you. Yes, these things must come together at some point in the future. But for now, it sounds like trade problems are not the focus of the Trump administration, at least not getting China to change its trade policies.
I hear you, and thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us this morning. Bonnie Glaser is Managing Director of the Indo-Pacific Program at the German Marshall Fund.